Hiya, we're Flux Liverpool.
Welcome to FluxSkills. My name's Joe.
And I'm AJ.
And today we have a very special series of guests. First and foremost, Jay Taylor from the Ruby Lounge. Welcome.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very, very good. We're all good.
We are good.
We'd like to ask you a couple of questions and then we're going to hand it over to you to ask the rest of our panel.
Far away.
Right, so question one, first and most obvious, promotion. What exactly do you do?
What do I do? Well, I kind of laughingly call it my 9 to 5, and it generally starts a little earlier than 9 and generally finishes quite a bit later than 5. I promote bands and performers and songwriters and things like that, and primarily in a venue called the Ruby Lounge, but sometimes in other places as well, primarily in Manchester, sometimes in Newcastle, occasionally in London, but mostly in Manchester, where I'm based. Although my next 2 shows aren't actually at the Ruby Lounge, they're in 2 other venues because it needs to be in different sizes. But that's all the things that being a promoter entails. So booking those bands, doing all the promotion leading up to it, be that posters and online stuff and all those kind of things that sell the show. Taking care of ticketing, taking care of poster art, taking care of supports. All those things leading up to the show and making sure that everything's done in advance to make that show a success.
So quite a handful then of stuff to do.
Yeah, but you have a fair amount of time to do it as well. It's 3 months, 4 months.
Is that per band or per kind of...
per show, yeah.
Per show, wow, okay, no problems.
So did you study to get where you are?
I didn't really. I mean, I suppose you could say that, listening to music and being excited by it and being motivated by it, you're picking things up as you go along. But I didn't do any formal training. When I was growing up, because it was a long time ago, there wasn't really a LIPA, there wasn't kind of like a fame school or anything like that. You sort of had to pick it up as you go along. So a lot of the people who were my contemporaries were sort of enthusiasts who had a crack at it, really. But also a lot of people like me were in bands. And it's always struck me that there were 2 types of people who were in bands. There were people who kind of wanted to play and wanted to record and do all those fun bits, but aren't really thinking about those other things that go on around it. They're not particularly thinking about press or publishing or how a studio works or the mechanics of a record label. Whereas I sort of paid attention a bit because I think in the back of my mind I probably knew that life as a paid musician was either non-existent or, like a mayfly, rather short. And so when I was in a studio I did pay attention, and when I was in the record label offices I did sort of ask the press person what they were doing, and when I met a publisher, when we got publishing deal, I kind of worked out what publishing was and spoke to promoters and all those different things that kind of work around a band being the centre. And so when it came to needing a job that actually paid me an honest wage, when it wasn't going to be a musician anymore, I sort of picked promotions because that was the thing that sort of was making me excited. I was being excited about being in venues, still excited about standing in that room and watching that energy fly backwards and forwards between the crowd and the band on stage.
So would you say that it's part producing knowledge about where you want to get into?
Yeah, I think you should pick things up as you go along. I mean, if you're not taking it down the road of a formal education and you're not sitting there in a lecture theatre and being told how the mechanics of the music industry works, and you are going to be sort of like an embryonic self-employed person, you sort of need to kind of pay attention, really. And now it's quite easy to do. I mean, if you're in a music venue and you see a sound engineer, there's nothing stopping you going up and asking them a question. I mean, they may tell you to get lost. But, every so often a kindly person will give you sage advice. People knock on my door, and say, listen, can I come and talk to you? I aspire to be this, I aspire to be that and the other. And if I've got time, I'll always talk to them.
Yeah.
Those things aren't a secret. It's just that they're sort of on public record, but you sort of need to be persistent a little.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Jay, last question. What would be your top tip for young people wanting to prove to their parents in particular that the arts industry is something worthwhile getting into and can be very realistically achieved?
Well, there's probably a lot of sage advice that you could kind of give a young person in terms of swinging something past their parents. It's quite easy for me because my dad was a bass player, my mum was a showgirl, and so because they'd had showbiz careers, it never really came up that it wasn't a viable option because they'd earned money doing it. They had careers. Yeah. But I think if I was going to choose one thing, point out to them how much money the UK music industry makes for the state, and makes for the country, and where it is in that hierarchy of things that raise money for the country. Yeah. And it's pretty high up. It was in the top 3 for a while. It may well still be in the top 3. It was up there with kind of Formula 1 and whiskey and stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And so that it's a viable industry, and that the things that support that industry, like this and LIPA and some of those other things that kind of like could help young people kind of get a foothold, are far more easily attained now than they ever were in the 80s, 70s, 60s.
It's good
Now
to
there's
know.
like an infrastructure to help young people,
Yeah.
and that is what I would say to my folks.
Spot on advice. We're now going to pass Jay on to the rest of our panel members for an individual Q&A, so stay tuned.